Right, it is 12:02. So Paul, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and jump into it. For all the attendees, thank you for joining us today on this first presentation in the webinar series for government relations. Is going to cover a post-election recap, and what does it all mean specifically for us folks participating in the transportation industry. Hey, Paul, if you can.
Oh, sorry.
No worries, brother. So in today's agenda, we're going to recap the presidential race. We're going to break down the new makeup of the House, take a look at the Senate, and also explore what it all means specifically for our members in the transportation industry and some of the initiatives we have. Discuss the new Congress as well as the TTA's legislative agenda, and in addition, some of the other events we have coming up for the year. So to give a brief introduction to both of us, my name is Chase Lafferty. I'm the president of H&M Transport operating in Manassas, Virginia, which is about 20 miles outside of Washington, D.C. I'm primarily an NEMT provider, and we provide services throughout Maryland, D.C., Virginia, a little bit into West Virginia, and even some into East Tennessee. And then I'm joined today by the TTA lobbyist, Mr. Paul Miller, with Miller Winhold Capital Strategies. Paul has been the TTA's legislative counsel since 2010. He is a registered lobbyist here in DC. He's been the past president of both the American League of Lobbyists and the National Institute for Lobbying and Ethics. And he worked with the House and Senate leadership to reopen Capitol Hill during the pandemic. This guy knows what he's talking about, and I'll go ahead and pass the baton over to you, Mr. Paul.
Appreciate it, Chase. Thank you, Bina. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Good morning on this Friday. Here, at least, it's a little bit snowy, so hopefully it's a little bit better where you're at. As Chase mentioned, we've got a lot to discuss. So if you have some questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat box, and we will answer those questions as they come up. So you don't have to wait till the end. I just find it works a little bit better so we can answer your question sooner rather than later. You may forget it or we may forget it. So want to make sure any and all questions are addressed as they come up. It's been an interesting time here in Washington, and I guess I like to, when I do these things, I like to add a little entertainment to it so that it's not all either boring and hey, I don't like this, I hate this. It's one side, one side's gonna like things, one side's not, and that's really what we're seeing right now with what happened in this election. So just when you think things can't get any more confusing, that's exactly what happened in November. And so for those of you old enough to remember this Saturday morning cartoon, you'll kind of get what this is. So we'll get going here. So we'll start with the race for the White House. There's a lot of excitement and disappointment depending on what side of the aisle you sit on. I've been doing this a long time, and this is the first time I've seen a post-election where you have such a division of folks who are very high and those who are very low, to the point where you have folks staying home, can't do their job because of what they see is going to be the world coming to an end because we have a President-elect Trump. But let's not forget, we've already had a President Trump once, and the world didn't come to an end. We are a very polarized country, more so than ever before. And you say that every year, but we continue to get more polarized. And Trump does have an appeal to some, and he tends to say what he wants. And at the moment, and sometimes it's probably not the right thing to say at the moment, or even say out loud. So for those on the winning team, well, I'll call the winning side this year, if you're pro-Trump or pro-Republican, I just want to make it clear this was not a wave election, possibly a mandate. A wave is much more than what we have seen. And so I know when people are saying, hey, this was a red wave, it really was not. But let's talk about what some of these results all meant. First, we started with a sitting president who, we'll say that dropped out at the 11th hour, or I'll like to say was forced out at the 11th hour. And this posed a real problem for Democrats. You had a president for the last 2 years who was deteriorating. Everybody saw it. Democrats internally will tell you they saw it. You had sitting members of Congress, or at least one, from Minnesota who decided to challenge the president in a primary, who lost and was really ostracized for it. He's now retiring at the end of the session. But Mr. Phillips was the first one to really call out the need for the Democrats to move in a different direction. Democrats said no. The president was never going to drop out at that point in time either. It took that debate performance for the world to see. The president did look lost. After that, the money started to dry up, and you had Nancy Pelosi behind the scenes working with others to try to force the president out. And again, that did happen. And so where did the Democrats go? They had two options. One, they could nominate or put in place Vice President Kamala Harris as their standard bearer, or they could try to, leading up to their convention, try to do a mini primary. They did not want to do that. They didn't think they'd have the time. They thought there would be too many candidates and it would be utter chaos at the convention that they didn't want to have happen. So they took the easy path and they put forward Kamala Harris. Everybody came out of the woodwork and supported her, endorsed her. It was as if she was the next coming. And so there was a lot of excitement, engagement. They went into their convention very unified, had a very positive convention from celebrities and all this other good stuff that you see, the pomp and circumstance at these conventions. And then we'll talk about how it kind of went from there. You had a former president who went from sky high in the polls to trailing. When Biden was the nominee, everybody was already measuring the drapes and the curtains and what positions they were going to take. The House was expected to actually have that wave that we were talking about. The Senate was looking to get close to the 60 seats they need to make it filibuster proof. And then you have the president drop out, and then it's the whole new ball game. And then they had to regroup and refocus their attention on the new nominee, and that was the vice president. You had, the vice president who seized on her moment. It was an opportunity for an African-American woman to be the first female president in the United States, and that energized a lot of people, particularly in the Democratic base. You had a third-party candidate with a famous last name who was never going to be president, but he was popular enough, had he not had a lot of missteps, that could have played a bigger role in whether or not Trump and or Harris got elected, which one got elected. He had some problems, kind of fell to the wayside, and then became, I will say, more popular or revived when he joined the Trump team and endorsed Trump. He cut a deal with Trump. He's now going to be the head of Health and Human Services, which is a big agency to run. So we're a lot of nervous people on that. So we will see how that turns out. But that was a deal that was made to get that endorsement. And I do believe in some respects it did help Trump. And then, we've seen two assassination attempts on this former president-elect. And that for us in this country is very scary, because you have had more members of Congress now needing security detail over the last several years than we've ever seen before. The attempts on these folks, the emails they get, the people coming to their offices. I look back, and the last time I remember a member of Congress being shot is Gabby Giffords from Arizona. And that left her in a disabled state. And so, the president was just centimeters away from, taking one that would have been deadly and costly. And so the fact that they came back and really capitalized on that. And so then you have a vice president who was a rock star and then became a pariah. A lot of finger pointing in the last days of the campaign by the Harris team and outsiders, and that's continuing today. And that's not uncommon. After your team loses, you always look and point fingers. Republicans have done it in the past. The question just becomes now: do Democrats take what they were hearing in the numbers that they saw and why they lost and change that? I think you'll get some of that, but I don't think you're going to get the full-blown change that they think they need. And if you did, it's going to take several election cycles to accomplish that. It's going to take the right candidates to do that. Again, Republicans have had their challenges in doing that in the past as well. And so then you have a former president who campaigned on mass deportations, and if you will look at some of the numbers, and went up from his first original campaign to this year in that voting category. And so, the argument was, well, people who were looking to get deported were never going to vote for Trump. The reality is a lot of them did. They were less concerned about being deported and more concerned about, the economics, the issues. And again, we'll talk about some of that stuff. Why wasn't this a wave election? Yes, Republicans captured all three. They captured the White House, they captured the Senate, and they captured the House, but not by large numbers. I mean, if you go back several election cycles where when Republicans did have a red wave and they captured 39 to 42 seats, that for me is a wave. We're going to be relatively about even when all is said and done. When you look at the House numbers, there's three outstanding races to be called. So I think you needed more House seats to be called in Republican favor in order to be called a wave. And then you lost some seats on the Senate that Republicans in a wave election would have won, like Nevada and Wisconsin. So I say, was it some? I see this more as a mandate election. Yes, you flipped all three. The electoral college numbers were good. The popular votes were good for Trump. And I say no in the sense that this, for me, as much as people like to talk about, this was about the issues that Democrats didn't look at their base and say, hey, this was about pocketbook issues. I also think this was a referendum on the vice president. I think there was a lot of people in this country who were upset that she didn't win a vote. She was actually put forward by the Democratic Party, so voters didn't have an opportunity to pick their candidate of choice. And then you had a candidate who, as vice president, didn't, in my humble opinion, was kept in the back bench just because she had some missteps early. And Republicans were able to paint her as the border czar, and there were challenges in the first couple of years of the Biden administration when it came to the numbers of people crossing the border illegally. So you look at that, and I think for me, that played as big of a role as the issues did when it came to whether or not she was going to get the votes. Now let's look at the numbers. Let's look at 2016. Trump beats Clinton in the Electoral College, but again, Clinton beats Trump by about almost 3 million votes. So that's a big number. And if you look back at that election, if you remember, Clinton could have won that election had she just gone and spent a little time in Wisconsin. That was the big argument. She believed she had Wisconsin in the bag, never went there, and that was the criticism by folks in Wisconsin. She never came and proved that she wanted our vote. I'm from Wisconsin, so I got to talk to a lot of those people who were just upset. A lot of those voters were normally her voters, and some of them either stayed home or just voted for Trump. And so that's where you get those numbers. And then you look at 2020, Biden crushes Trump, and people will say, well, why? Because if you look at 2024, the numbers are down. He beats Harris. Some argue that it's because Harris and Clinton were women and Trump is a man and Biden's a man. That's why they won. I will disagree with that. I think if you put forward a woman, whether they're Democrat or Republican, and they have an agenda, they can win. What you have here is two women who I don't think a lot of the American people trusted. And you look at Biden and why Biden beat Trump, in my humble opinion, it was that election was anybody but Trump. People had had enough of the antics, the day-to-day comments, the tweeting, and all the other stuff. So for me, it really wasn't about how qualified Biden was. It was more about we want anybody but Trump. And so I don't think you could have gotten away with it this year because it didn't work. You just didn't have the right candidate for that. Had the Democrats selected another, what I'll call more mainstream candidate, or even if they went to the left with Governor Newsom from California, I think they had a shot at beating Trump. There were candidates out there I think could have done that if they were the nominee from the get-go and not thrown into the mix there at the end. So, and then you talk about the blue wall. I mean, that's the one thing we heard over and over and over. The Democrats got the blue wall. They're going to stop Trump in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the blue collar states, things like that. And at the end of the day, you had the vice president probably a month before the election or 3 weeks before the election go out and praise people in Michigan for getting out and voting early. And the lines were around the block. They sensed that was going to be a vote for them. Hillary Clinton said the same thing, and the same thing happened. They didn't come out and vote for Clinton. They didn't come out and vote for Harris. They ended up voting for Trump. And so that became a problem. And, the vice president needed those three states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and she didn't get them. And the closing weeks of the campaign, Trump spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania. That was a toss-up, and Trump did what I'll call a pretty good job of getting out there and telling a story. Whether you like the story or not, he tended to connect with people, blue-collar folks, and whereas Harris did not. I mean, the story of her being from a small business family didn't resonate with people because nobody bought it. And Trump, he's not a small business guy either, but Trump can talk what I'll call the talk with folks in the middle class. And he acts like the middle class. He says some things that they want to say. And he's not politically correct. And I think a lot of that has continued to play into his popularity and his growing numbers. And so if you look at, where the economy mattered, it was blue collar workers who, in a lot of cases, made the difference. And particularly, it was persons of color. So let's look at the breakdown. Look at where Trump was in 2020 and 2024. In a lot of these categories, he goes up. And when he goes down, so does she. I mean, you look at Black women, she only was a +1. Trump's a +2. Not a big deal for Trump. He never was going to garner much support from that community. And same for college educated. Trump went down only 1. Harris was even. So you look at, Biden fared a lot better than she did in a lot of these places. And look where Trump did. I mean, Latino women, Trump went up 8%. That's a big number. And Latino men, again, an even bigger number. And so you look at why Kamala Harris lost, look at the numbers right there. They weren't catering to their base or their main voters. They weren't catering to the middle class. And Democrats will even come out and tell you, we lost sight of what was important to our people. Harris ran on two issues. It was abortion and then anything but Trump. Trump was going to take this, that, and enough away from you. And that didn't resonate with people. I should say a lot of people. Now look at some exit polls and where voters were. The economy, very important to Republicans. Democrats who were asked, this wasn't an issue for them. I suspect they didn't go into those minority communities and ask that question. State of the economy. This one for me was important because this is the one the Harris team was talking about. This was 81% of Democrats thought this was important, only 17% of Republicans. And at the end of the day, Harris, I believe, was a little overconfident when you look at the numbers of people surveyed about why this was important. And they thought that this was an anti-Trump movement. At the end of the day, this really wasn't. I think people, when you look at the state of the economy, didn't trust her. And it was a negative for her and not him. And I think that's where they miscalculated on that. Immigration, 89% big for Republicans, 9% for Democrats. And abortion was huge for Democrats, 76-24. And then foreign policy, 55, that's always a number, probably over 50% for Republicans and lesser for Democrats. So then you look at the White House exit polls and what went wrong for Harris. Again, on election night and even after, you could break down numbers, not just by state, not just by person, voting block, age, education, all the other stuff. Go into the Democratic counties in the states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and compare those to where Biden was 4 years ago. She didn't do as well. And where she needed to run up in counties like Florida and Pennsylvania, she didn't run up the numbers like she needed to. And actually, Trump did better in some of those counties than he did in the first go around. And so in order for her to win in Florida, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, she really needed to run up the numbers, and she was unable to do that. Again, Trump overperformed in a few of these counties. Again, the not qualified played a big role in the campaign didn't expect. Her being handed the nomination, as we mentioned earlier, the focus on celebrities. That's the one that I think people, really got tired of, is the Taylor Swifts of the world and all those people, Oprah, coming out and saying, hey, we're part of the middle class. Nobody thought they were part of the middle class. And that they just didn't connect with folks who were looking and living paycheck to paycheck. Oprah doesn't live paycheck to paycheck. Taylor Swift doesn't live paycheck to paycheck. And so they're coming out and endorsing and coming out and cutting all these commercials and talking about the issues really didn't resonate with people that, have 2 or 3 jobs and say, hey, well, it's not working for me. And then they forgot their base. And that's what we, every Democrat will come out and tell you. And, you have a Sherrod Brown, who is senator from Ohio, who is what I will call the working man senator down the Democratic side, who lost. He has even come out and talked about it. And he's got a plan to kind of trying to help them get back and garner and talk about what's important to the middle class. And I always like to point to, as former Clinton advisor James Carville said in 1992, it's the economy, stupid. It was this time. It really was. And again, people talked about, hey, high bread prices and grocery prices and gas prices and everything else was going up. They did, and it was hard for some in the middle class to keep track and keep going on that. And then even the Latino community, which still risks mass deportations, turned out for Trump in larger numbers than they had hoped for or expected on the Harris side. So let's now dive into what a Trump administration will look like in some regards. I'm just going to leave this slide and talk about this one because this is the one that really primarily impacts us, and that's the Department of Transportation. You have a new secretary that has been nominated. He'll have to go through the confirmation process. By all accounts, he will fly through. He is a Republican, conservative Republican from Wisconsin, former congressman. He served 4 terms in Congress. He left in 2019 to return home to help care for a sick child. He had, since that point in time, was a TV host on The Bottom Line on Fox. He is a former lobbyist. He's what I will call pragmatic, but for me, the biggest downside is Sean has 0 experience in transportation. So when you look at all the people that have been nominated for any cabinet post, what they are Trump, what I'll call quote unquote loyalists, people who are going to be in Trump's corner. Trump said he is not going to make the mistake he did the first time around and just nominate what I'll call maybe more qualified people with more background in these areas. These are some of the folks who he believes turned on him. Senator Sessions as Attorney General. You have the folks at Secretary of State. A number of other agencies had the outs with Trump, and he didn't want to go through that. Sean Duffy fits the category for the Trump. He will, I think, be very loyal to the president. We will see if he's very loyal to our industry. So let's look at the Senate. They pick up 4 seats. So there is now a Republican majority. Senator John Thune from South Dakota was just elected last week to be the new majority leader of the Senate. He replaces Mitch McConnell. John is a conservative Republican, but I also call him a pragmatic Republican. He doesn't fit the Trump loyalist category. So we will see how that goes for him. He won that vote. Again, secret ballots are always hard to gauge, but again, by all accounts, he beat Senator John Cornyn from Texas by 1 vote to become the majority leader. So I think that's a very good pick for Republicans, and we will see how that goes. They flipped. Montana was an easy flip. The minute the election cycle started, that was the day that Senate seat flipped. Senator Tester was never going to keep that seat. As popular as he's been in the state of Montana, his problem is he has not been home to the state of Montana in a long time. And when his residents come out here, the senator is nowhere to be found to meet with them. So kind of not the only one. He's lost touch with his constituents, and he lost touch with everything that was happening back home in Montana. He lived here and spent a lot of time here. But you also had Tim Sheehy, an ex-Navy SEAL and millionaire businessman, put a lot of his own money into his campaign, but a very good candidate. And so that helped. And then in Ohio, that was expected from a Republican flip. It was a little bit more of a toss-up for me because I did like what Senator Brown was doing the last month of the campaign. The polling numbers were close. But at the end of the day, you had Bernie Moreno, a car dealer and early blockchain investor, get a lot of help from the Republican Party. He wasn't the greatest of candidates, but again, in this what I'll call phase of anti Harris movement, it was a downward. Everybody voted. You voted for Trump. You more likely voted for the Senate candidate as well, for Moreno. So Moreno benefited from Trump. And then you had Pennsylvania, which is a little bit more of a surprise for me. Senator Casey has been a longtime senator. His father was governor of Pennsylvania. He was popular on both sides of the aisle for a long time, but he has really done nothing since he's been to Washington. He's been what everyone calls the type of a backbencher, has no real legislative accomplishments. He waffles on a lot of issues and that people care about. I've had the opportunity to work with that office on several occasions, and you really haven't been able to get a direct answer out of them where they stand. So it's not a surprise. Dave McCormick, again, I didn't think was the best candidate out there, but very wealthy, dumped a lot of money into his campaign. And again, in the last month, benefited very heavily from Trump coming to Pennsylvania, and a lot of people going in and out of the state, big time name Republicans going in and out of the state supporting McCormick. So that was that. Another one that was not a surprise was West Virginia. Again, once Manchin decided he was going to retire, this was going to be a flip seat. So Republicans were automatically guaranteed 2 seats. Senator-elect Jim Justice, West Virginia governor and billionaire businessman, popular back home. And I will call, again, conservative Republican, but also what I'll call a pragmatic Republican. And so it was an easy win for them. So, and then Democrats barely hung on to Nevada and Wisconsin, and states that they should have more easily have won. Wisconsin, I didn't think they had a great candidate, but again, it was that Trump factor. And then Democrats flip Arizona from independent Sinema to Senator-elect Ruben Gallego. Gallego is very left, whereas Sinema has gone more to the middle, and in a lot of cases has been a hindrance to Democrats and voted more with Republicans. And so they were not happy with her, and that was when she had to go. And so now, again, you call it a flip. So this is where the committees are going to shake out. And these, I just focused on a couple of where TTA will have business and where we'll have to go, and talked about some of our issues. So the banking committee, it's Tim Scott is a possible chair, Republican from South Dakota. He was one of the original Republicans running for president this cycle, dropped out. Very smart guy, very low key kind of guy, but I think he'll be a good fit there. The question just becomes, what does Senator Grassley do from Iowa? Grassley is 90 years old. Grassley is current chair of the Finance Committee, but he has also been chair of the Judiciary Committee. And now I think he wants to change and go back to Judiciary, but Republicans have very deep concerns about him going back there. They do not want to run into the situation the Democrats had with Dianne Feinstein, who her age kind of caught up to her, let's say. And Democrats had to prop her up and finally push her out of that role. Republicans do not want to see that. So it's all going to depend. The Banking Committee and a few others, which we'll go over, are all going to depend on what Senator Grassley does. But if Senator Grassley decides to take finance, Tim Scott will likely be banking. Ted Cruz has seemed to get the thumbs up from Republicans to be the Commerce Committee chair. And in Senate Finance, again, this is one where Grassley will have a sway depending on where he goes. Mike Crapo from Idaho, who is currently the ranking member, could end up there as the chair. Homeland Security, Rand Paul seems to have gotten the thumbs up from Republicans to take over that committee, which is a big one, has a lot of reach for us, and one that I think he is going to be a wild card on several of our issues. But I do think we have an opportunity to get his ear and have an opportunity to get our issues before him. Health, education, labor, and pensions. Senator Cassidy's got the green light to take that over. He is the current ranking member. And Bernie Sanders is likely to be the ranking member over there. But Bill Cassidy is one I think we can work with. He is conservative. He was somebody who hasn't been a Trump supporter. And so that we'll see how that shakes out with the Trump administration. But I think that was a good choice. He's a doctor, so he gets it. He's very smart, and they need somebody like that as the chair. Again, going back to Judiciary, and this one will be big for us. If Grassley takes that over, I think we will be okay. If Lindsey Graham gets that position, he is not a favorite of a lot in the Republican caucus, particularly in Trump orbit. They don't trust him. And so they do not want him presiding over issues that may impact Trump. And so we're going to see where that happens. Dick Durbin will be the ranking member, so he will be very aggressive in pushing the committee to not just go all in Trump. And so, but as in the minority, you don't have a lot of sway. So now I can ask, Chase, I can stop here and ask if anybody has any questions, if anybody wants to ask any real quick before we move to the House. Any questions? No, hearing none, we'll just keep rolling. Oh, Judy raised her hand. How do we, Abina, how do you?
Judy should be able to talk now.
All right, Judy, what do you have for us?
I was just curious how you believe that Mark Warner will do from Virginia. I forget which committee you said that he would be potentially when you were flipping through the slides. you had his name up there. I was just curious about the possible ranking member for banking.
Yeah, I think that is an opportunity. He's also, I mean, he's a tech guy by his career, and so he's played a role in that. But he's also been very interested in foreign policy. So we'll see. We'll have to see where those all shake out. Democrats have some changes that they're going to have to go through as well. None of those will be decided until early January to mid-January, and so we'll have to wait and see. But I think Warner will have a say as to where he goes just because of his seniority in the caucus.
Hello?
Yep.
Just one follow-up. I know that every time I talk to them, he keeps talking about having portable benefits for independent contractors in the gig economy, especially as well. So I don't know if that'll ever come up if he's in banking, but I do know that we've had a lot of discussions about that.
Yeah, and that fits right into his former career path. And when Uber and Lyft really came into this in 2010, over the years, Warner has been at the forefront about these portable benefits, but that's kind of where it ended. He's had legislation introduced, but never really pushed it aggressively and forward. And I'm not sure I expect him to do it here either.
Okay.
Again, when you talk, we'll get into the issues on independent contractor. I think it's going to be hard for him to do any of that in his minority role in the Senate going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Let's move to the House unless anybody else has any questions. Again, House, what I'll say is kind of stood pat. Current makeup, you have 221 Republican, 211 Democrats. You had 3 vacancies with some deaths and some retirements in those 3. So now you look at 2025 where we are. We have 3 uncalled races right now. You have 219 Republican, 213 Democrats. The uncalled ones are for Iowa 1, Congresswoman Miller Meeks. She's expected to win. If you remember her name from several election cycles ago, she won by 10 votes originally when she came to Congress. So her races are always tight. They are reaching out to people now because they are going through that recount, but it's all expected that she will hold on to that seat. Congressman Duarte, current Republican holding that seat versus Democratic Gray. Incumbent Duarte has a slim lead in their recount as well, so they're expecting that Duarte will win that seat. And then you have challenger Tran versus incumbent Steele. Tran is leading in that final counts of that race, so a lot of people believe that will be a Democrat takeover, and so you'll end up likely with 221 to 214. And so we'll see how that shakes out. Again, you'll have a Republican Congress that's very narrow. Republicans will lose 3 seats right out of the gate, as you see below. Congressman Walz, Congresswoman Stefanik, and Congressman Gates all have been tapped by the administration to come into as secretary roles or national security advisor. And so those are 3 Republican seats, but it's going to take a couple months for those special elections to be called and run and the votes to be tallied for those people to be seated. So Republicans will be down 3 votes right out of the gate, and that's not where they want to be. You look at Republican losses, you can look at upstate New York, where several moderates had lost, and that was kind of expected. And then you had, what was unexpected for Democrats, is that moderates like David Valadao held on to win. David Valadao did not support Trump. He voted to impeach Trump, and so he was on the outs with Trump. And so Valadao hanging on was a big win for Republicans. And then we talk about those who have been nominated to go into the Trump administration. Matt Gaetz resigned the day that Trump nominated him to be Attorney General, so he is no longer in the House, which means he doesn't have any votes, and that was done to prevent an ethics investigation report to come out. There are several allegations against the former congressman that the Justice Department decided not to pursue, but the Ethics Committee did their own investigation, and from all reports, that was going to be a damning report. So that got out, which it was always going to. Trump administration thought that they could weather that storm. Gaetz started making rounds to 2 senators this week, and it became too much. So Mr. Gaetz decided to pull his name from consideration. So he is not in Congress. He is not going to be the Attorney General. But this all sets up Mr. Gates to run for governor. That has been the plan from the get-go. DeSantis is term limited. So Gates will now continue to run for governor of Florida. That report, ethics report, I suspect will come out at some point in time. Somebody will leak it some way, shape, or form. We'll see how that plays for his race down in Florida. But as of right now, that will be kept under seal because he's no longer in Congress. And then the speaker was going to have a complicated path to become the speaker, Mike Johnson. The Freedom Caucus there are a lot of folks who are not happy with the way he has run things. Freedom Caucus for the last several years have been complaining that they don't have a say. They were the ones who booted out former Speaker McCarthy. They picked one of their own in Johnson, but Johnson has, learned that you just can't say no to everything if you want government and the people to be taken care of. And so Johnson, I think, has done a fairly good job as speaker. And yesterday he kind of solidified should be a smooth sailing to the speakership when he appointed or created a new committee in Congress, a subcommittee in Congress for Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been one of his biggest nemesis. She has now endorsed the speaker, and so that will bring some votes along. So there's always that quid pro quo. So we'll see. I don't think he'll have to rely on as many Democrats as you may think as he did to save his job this year. But he will have to rely on Democrats in the new Congress if they are going to get a lot of things done. And I'm not sure this Democratic class is going to want to save him this time. They may want to sink the ship on this one because they want, again, hard feelings. And so they're not going to want to play ball just to move things forward because they want to win the next election. So look at the House and where some of the key committees that we're going to be dealing with. Sam Graves from Missouri, he is the current chair. He is term limited. He has requested a waiver. That's not likely. The waivers are rare these days. So what I think you're going to see is Rick Crawford, who is going to be probably the next chair. If you talk to folks right now, he seems to be leading that race. Rick Larson from Washington will continue to be the ranking member. Oversight, which has jurisdiction over our GSA fleet bill, which we'll talk a little bit about. Congressman Comer will remain chair of that. Jerry Conley is a possible ranking member for that, but Mr. Conley came out right after the election and announced he had esophageal cancer. So I'm not sure how that will impact him going forward, how that will impact his committee assignments. I don't know how healthy he is or how serious this is for him going forward. But Congressman Raskin has dealt with cancer the last several years, and he's continued in his minority or ranking member role and done a fairly good job. He's showed up and been there. So we'll just have to wait and see how serious of this is for Mr. Conley. Waiting in the wings is the other congressman from Illinois, Chris Worthy. So he's possible if Conley is unable to take the reins. Energy and Commerce, it's a two-way race between Bob Latta and Brett Guthrie. If I'm putting money on it right now, I give the odds to Brett Guthrie to win that vote, and he will, I think, be the next chair. Frank Pallone from New Jersey will continue to be the ranking member. And then I don't think you're going to see many changes here at Judiciary. I think Jim Jordan, he's the ranking member. He will assume the chairmanship role. And then you have the administration adding in what they're calling a new department. It's really not a new agency or department within the administration. It's really a committee. And they put out an announcement a couple of weeks ago. They are asking people to volunteer up to 80 hours a week to be on this committee. So if you have nothing better to do in your day and you want to volunteer some time and step away from your job, I suspect you could probably get on here and look at, they say they're going to go through the government with a scalpel like a lot of other administrations do and say, we're going to cut the fat, we're going to cut the waste, we're going to cut the bureaucracy and all that other good stuff. The reality is this is more about cutting government employees. There are a lot of folks who do not want to work in a Trump administration who are career bureaucrats, I'll call them. And Trump has wanted to get rid of a lot of them and make them political appointees so he can put his own people in there. I think that's going to be very hard to do, but I do think you will see a large number of people exit, career people exit and look for other opportunities, which means presents other opportunities for Trump world folks to get in there. I like this idea here. whether you like Musk or you like Vivek, I think what they're trying to do could be very beneficial for us, particularly where it comes to our GSA legislation, but more importantly for our microtransit bill that we're trying to pass. Instead of having the government provide these services, that they should be contracted out to the private sector, where we can save the government 2 or 3 times more. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we are going to engage this group and try to put our issues before them to see if we can't get them on the Trump administration radar screen. So let's jump into the issues real quickly. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask them as we come up. The biggest issue for us over the last several years has been the independent contractor status. And during Trump's first administration, he revamped that. And then when Biden came in, he has now changed that rule. It became significantly revised the test for independent contractor status, whereas the economic reality test now requires 6 categories versus the 2 or 3 that were original. This is now sitting in the courts. This was set to take effect earlier this year. It technically did, but the courts are looking at this. We believe that we have an opportunity to overturn this in the courts. But now with a new Trump administration, we feel good that we have a real opportunity for Trump to go after this and put it back to where his original administration was on this issue, which was helpful for our folks. But the downside, or what I'll call the wild card for us, is he has just nominated former Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRaymer, a Republican from Oregon, to be the Secretary of Labor. She has always been squishy on this. She has not been, she's always kind of hid behind her constituents when it came to this issue. We pressed her with our coalition for the last several years on this, and we never really got a good definitive answer where she stood. The fact that the unions have pushed her for this role and she is now going to get this role could set us back. But again, we're going to see how well she plays ball with the president, or does he have to replace her at some point in time? But this is one that we will keep our eyes on very closely, because we would have preferred somebody more business friendly than the former Congresswoman. So the other piece is we serve on a very large coalition, or serve in a very large coalition. We serve on the executive committee, which means we have a say in the things that they're doing. It's a cost saving measure for us. So instead of having to outlay a lot of money to file, lawsuits or rules within the agencies when they come out for rulemakings, we join this coalition who writes them, has a law firm on retainer to do that. We get a look at the comments or any lawsuit, and we get to have a say in that. And that's important. It has been important for us. So things that weren't originally in the comments that were going to be submitted to the Department of Labor on the independent contractor about a year ago, we were able to change some of that. That was more satisfactory to our specific industry, and that's been very helpful. So we participate in calls on a weekly basis. We participate in joint Hill visits with them. So we are very engaged in that. Our executive board is very engaged in this as well. It continues to be a top priority for us, and it does give us an opportunity, particularly now with the House, Senate, and White House controlled by Republicans, to move the needle on this in a legislative way where we were unable to this past 2 years. But again, we still believe that this is going to be settled in the courts, and we do believe that we have a real opportunity to overturn this. And we do think the Department of Labor overreached in this regard. And again, if you talk to some, and even the unions will say, this wasn't a union play. Union membership has been going down year after year. This was an opportunity to quickly re-engage that and build that membership back up. Okay, so then we'll move to overtime. The overtime rules, those were increased. This was going to have a detrimental impact on a lot of small businesses. A lot of small businesses have not implemented those rules, even though they went into effect earlier this year as well. This was stuck in the courts. The court just recently ruled in favor of those defendants, and so this rule has now been overturned. So you do not have to increase the pay. It was originally going to go from $35,000 annually to $43,888 in 2024, and then increase to $58,656 in 2025. Those thresholds no longer apply. So the $35,568 annual threshold still exists. That was a big win for us as well. we worked very hard as an organization to be part of the discussions on this and show the impacts of what this would have on our drivers. So this, the next one, the GSA fleet issue, is probably one some of you have not heard of. One of your biggest costs, as you know, is buying vehicles. And so during the pandemic, you had vehicles that were sitting on parking lots. You were still paying for those vehicles. You were still paying insurance. You were still paying a lot of things to cover those vehicles. You were keeping drivers employed, and nobody was riding in your vehicle. And so now a lot of you stayed afloat with getting some PPP money and others, EIDL loan money. And a lot of you use your life savings to keep afloat. Things are getting better, but again, the still cost for you is buying new or used vehicles. And so the government, we decided to look at what the government is doing. The government owns a large number of vehicles, and each year they send a good portion of those vehicles to auction. Those auctions, depending on where you are, could be open to you. A lot of those auctions are not open to us. And so what we have decided to do is ask Congress to introduce legislation, and we got that through Congresswoman Carol Miller from West Virginia, who is a small business owner, to introduce legislation 2 years ago, or I guess in 2023, that would require the government to set a certain percentage of these vehicles that they're going to sell at auction aside for our industry, and that those would be sold to us at cost. And that in order to do so, and we would be able to be eligible for 50 vehicles a year. And when you take one of your vehicles off the streets, what you had to do is donate it to a charity or give it to a local school for their mechanics class or something like that. You had to give it back to the community. And so that was one of the things that was important for folks in the Black Caucus who wanted to support this. They wanted to make sure some of those vehicles were getting into the communities that they represent. And so we put that in there for them. So we have gotten very positive feedback from both sides of the aisle on this. We do expect the car dealerships to push back on this because this obviously will take some vehicles away from them. So what we are looking to do in 2025, we have gone back to Congresswoman Miller. We want to make this even a simpler of a bill. What we'd like to do right now, under the rules for these auctions, states, local governments, and Indian tribes can go in there and get first crack at these vehicles, and they get sold to them at cost. What we want to change our legislation is just follow into those footsteps. We want to be put into the category of states, local governments, and Indian tribes. Again, our bill was a pilot, 5-year pilot. We thought that if, after 5 years, we wouldn't necessarily need that service. But the reality is our goal was after 5 years if this legislation passed, was that we would make this this would just automatically become a permanent thing. So it starts as a pilot, make it a little more palatable for some, and then it becomes a permanent program at some point in time down the road. But we're looking at changing this just so that in a permanent way, so that we could be listed and given priority like states, localities, and Indian tribes. So that one is one we would like to see put into the transportation reauthorization bill, which will start in 2025. And then we move to microtransit. That's one of the issues we've heard the last 2 years from our membership about, that transit agencies are creating these programs internally. They are charging 2 and 3 times of what we can charge for those services, or what we can charge for those services and save the government. And so we have a bill right now that has been introduced by Congresswoman Lauren Boebert from Colorado, which really forces transit agencies to compete those contracts out to ours. So in other words, they have to do business with us. Those contracts have to be given to the private sector. And they cannot just be given to tech companies or software companies, i.e. brokers. They have to go to folks like Chase. They have to go to folks like on this call. But if a transit agency believes that they need to do all this in-house and not partner with us, they have to go through a waiver process, and they have to ask a waiver from the Department of Transportation, which we don't think will be granted in most cases. And so if they don't decide to contract these services out with you, the transit agency will not receive federal funding. And so that is the stick that we're holding over their heads. And so we have not had a negative response to this. We will get a negative response from unions. We will get negative response from some in the Democratic Party. But we do believe this has a real opportunity to be part of the transportation reauthorization package when it is finalized, and hopefully in 2026. And then newer for us over the last couple of years has been NEMT's dialysis pilot program. We have a draft of a bill that we had been working with some folks in the Georgia delegation on, which would expand NEMT coverage to Medicare. And we started as a pilot program using dialysis treatment as the place where we think we can get the most support. And again, it's at the end of the day, this is only for dialysis treatment. But again, at the end of the day, our hope is that this will be so wildly successful and needed that we can expand it to everybody. And so that is kind of dialysis treatment is our first step into that process. This will be a heavy lift in this environment. Republicans typically have not been so pro NEMT, but we will see how that all shakes out. But it is worth the fight, in my humble opinion, because I do think we can pull some Republicans into this. Then we have mobility scooter ADA exemptions. This is a newer one for us that we are looking at for 2025. We have seen articles and heard stories from our members where, you know, a van picks somebody up to take them to an appointment. They're in on a motorized scooter. That scooter gets put into the van or the vehicle, and the person does not want to transfer into a seat with a seat belt. Right now, depending on how you look at the ADA rules and laws, you can't require somebody to move out of a scooter into that seat. That is a dangerous situation. You can try to belt those scooters in, as a lot of you will know. That's not an easy thing to do. Those scooters don't come with the equipment on them to be able to do it. And two, it's just not safe. What happens if a driver, stops short and that person goes right over that scooter out and hurts themselves? You're liable for that. You're going to be sued for that. So we have been working on a situation where we changed the ADA exemptions to address the motorized scooter piece of it. We have reached out to some initial disability groups, and we have some support from at least one group right now who agrees with us that this is a safety issue, that there is no reason right now that they could see for most people not to be able to transfer out of the scooter into a seat where they can be belted in for their own safety and protection, as well as our own safety and protection. And so, again, that's going to be a major lift. But again, we think we have an opportunity to bring some light, shed some light on, and make some movement on. So at this point in time, I'm going to transfer it over or throw it back to Chase, who's going to talk about Veterans Affairs and NEMT services.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and really appreciate that thorough run through of the election. So this last point was something that was brought to us by a new member, and it's really in like the monitoring status now from a government affairs perspective, but it's the involvement of TNCs such as Uber and Lyft with VA contracts that were, for a long time set aside for service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses. There's been more adoption of the VA health systems around the country just going straight to Uber and Lyft and contracting with them. So kind of bypassing the set aside benefits that the veteran-owned businesses realize. And then, there's also the concern just from the SCA perspective. Is it a level playing field with, the more normal transportation companies that our members represent? Do they have a level playing field from the SCA compliance with, an Uber or a Lyft? So like I say, that one is in the monitoring status, but something that we will be looking into this year. Paul.
And I see it. I skipped over here. NEMT is a core healthcare service. So let me cover that. In 2019, TTA and others were very successful in codifying NEMT services. What happened was the first Trump administration came in and they were looking to eliminate this. And based on the myths that some had is that this was waste, fraud, and abuse that in the program, that this should be left up to the states to decide if and how they want to run these services. A lot of states were going to eliminate them. So we spent a lot of time, energy, and resources making sure that didn't happen, and we were very successful in 2019. So NEMT is codified into law, so meaning that no president can come in and just at their discretion do away with NEMT services. Congress would have to do that, which led us to say, hey, what happens if there is a Congress that wants to do that, and the numbers do get, in a wave type of election where you could do something like that? we are looking at possible legislation that would create NEMT services as a core healthcare service. So that would not be able to be done even in a Congress. So it's things, again, a lot of heavy lifts up here, but very critical issues to this industry, and they are worth pursuing. None of these will be short term, other than maybe the GSA fleet might be an easier one. Again, independent contractor status, we should know at some point in time, and I'd say that maybe the first quarter of 2025 where that shakes out. Overtime was a big success for us. So we'll see what, if anything, happens after the most recent ruling. But we have a lot of issues that are core to your bottom line business. And TTA, through this current president, Dan Reed, is putting a lot of energy into these issues and making sure that we're successful. So that means resources and time and energy are being put into these so that we can do all these things. And so I feel very energized about it. I love this agenda in that we have a very a lot of issues where we have not had necessarily in the past. So with that, Chase, I will stop there, answer any questions, or we can turn it back to you to conclude today.
Yeah. Does any the participants have any questions for Paul? Okay.
Go ahead, Ray.
Paul,
Yeah.
this is Ray Mundy. There's in the industry, there's a disparity somewhat in terms of what's required of the taxi industry for ADA compliance versus that of the ride-sharing industry. Do you see anything at a federal level that might try to bring parity with respect to the ADA compliance between those two competitors?
That's when it comes to the mobility thing and all of this, we have decided we're gonna try to tackle all of it and see what's possible and what's not. So that will be on the table as well, Ray.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Steve, go ahead.
Hi. Sorry about that. Couple of things. One on microtransit is a key measure of is the time between booking the ride and the arrival time. And if you have enough accessible vehicles in the mix, that wait time should be approximately the same. I just wanted to highlight that. As far as the effort by Musk and Vivek, most of the money for that subsidizes rides for older adults, people with disabilities, low-income people, et cetera, is outside DOT. Yet it's still 4 wheels, a driver, a vehicle. The fundamentals are identical. And I'm wondering if there's any possibility for transportation reauthorization or whatever to have the reporting standardized, because that's an added cost when you have to go with each agency's particulars, and have the oversight united with FTA, even though the money comes from one of the 10 other departments in the CCAM consortium.
I could see that as us doing that. I'd like to talk to you and Chase, and maybe Chase, we could have Steve come and talk to the committee. We have a committee meeting, I think, next month. Maybe we could add that to that so that as we look at 2025, we make sure that if this is possible, we add that to the mix.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
So Steve, we'll get you I'll talk to Chase and we'll figure out we have a date. Maybe we can put you on the agenda.
Great. Good agenda. Thank you.
Anybody else? Let me just make a note about that, Steve. Well, that's all I have, Chase, then. Let me turn it. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No worries. Yeah, so I know we're up against our the end of the meeting here, so I will bring it home with just a summary of the Government Affairs Committee, which I am the chairperson for this year. One of the main things that really I think is a value of TTA, it was the first event I was ever involved with in TTA, was the legislative fly-in. So what that is members come up to Washington, D.C. We have a meeting with a lot of representatives. They'll come speak to us one-on-one. We've done packed dinners like the Capitol Hill Club with multiple representatives, as well as go and visit everyone's actual representative in their office and talk about some of the key issues. And it's been very important for, driving forward the initiatives that we want from the TTA side. So for example, last year, we had a lot of success in introducing the GSA fleet bill, as well as the microtransit, and having the early discussions about NEMT expansion. It's just one of those things that these initiatives don't happen overnight, but having someone from the representative's district there talking about the real life problems they have in their businesses goes a really long way. So I certainly encourage anyone, if you have not attended the legislative fly-in, it's a great event. You will certainly not regret it. So definitely look into attending. And this year we are also hoping to open it up for some vendor sponsorship opportunities, giving our vendors a lot more visibility, kind of in a smaller group versus the large conference. A lot more one-on-one time with many of the members in attendance. So more will be coming out on that, but we expect a very successful fly-in session this year. And really in summary of all this, I think one key thing to keep in mind is one of the main values of TTA is these advocacy programs, and they have, since 1918, since the organization has started, have had a direct impact on the bottom line of the businesses. But it does take involvement from everyone and communication, and letting everyone know what those problems are at your local level, like what you would like the TTA to focus on. So we certainly welcome any feedback there or any additions to the legislative agenda for this year or moving forward. We also would like to create a round table for opportunities back in your state and the elected officials. So like to say, it's just sharing the problems that you're seeing on the ground, open forum, and let's brainstorm and expand out our legislative agenda further. And then some additional steps that we're taking this year from a government affairs committee standpoint is just more engagement with the members or non-members. So creating a section of the website that's keeping everyone informed on our agenda, and what's going on inside Washington. So it'd be a great news source for things that are happening on Capitol Hill, as well as how that could directly impact, your bottom line. And in final, the political action committees. This is extremely important. This is our way of raising funds for government affairs. And we target key leaders and members on both sides of the aisle. So we certainly encourage TTA members to attend any fundraising events that we have, whether it be at a conference or during our fly-in sessions that we have throughout the year, where we'll be going to different operators throughout the country and having just on-site visits. We plan to do some additional PAC activities during that time as well. So, we're very excited about what we have on the legislative agenda and, moving forward a lot of these items and, the engagement that we've been receiving from our members currently from a government affairs. So everyone keep it up. And if you're not a member of TTA, now is a great time to join. If you join today, you're paid up through the end of 2025. So there's no additional dues or anything for the rest of November and December. And we're looking forward to a lot of growth this year. We've got a lot of new faces coming into the association, and good things are happening at TTA. So I want to thank everyone for joining. I guess me and Paul can both stay on for Q&A, and if anyone has anything else. All right. Well, if no one has any questions, I want to thank everyone for attending. And if you have anything else for us, let us know.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Chase. Appreciate you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.